One thing I really like about your channel, like I have to say, is the animations and like you going into detail about like the different like like eras that you talk about, like specifically about obviously like medieval India.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I essentially have like certain topics of interest that I find that are a little bit more neglected subjects. Medieval
Yeah.
India is really neglected, which is why so much of my focus has been on that. Um, Traditionally, there's an enormous gap in scholarship when it comes to medieval India. It really, the way the narrative goes is Indus Valley, um, then goes through like the early states period, finally the Mauryans, then it just time skips all the way to the Guptas, and then it time skips again like 1,000 years to the Mughals, and then it goes British Raj, modern day. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, there's a few things in between that people are aware of. I think the Marathas people tend to be sort of aware of, and that's kind of fit in there, coinciding with the Mughals. But for the most part, people have really limited understandings of medieval Indian history. So that has been my focus so far. But I am branching out to other subjects. But in general, just trying to find stories that haven't really been told. And I do try to find the human element. So, because the human element is what inspires me to do that kind of like deeper research. Because, people tend to get a little bit upset by how long these videos take. But like you said, the animation and the research and like piecing it together into a narrative that people can understand and that will be appealing to someone who might not otherwise be that interested in that stuff. That's really, really difficult. And I need that human element to,
Yeah.
you know, justify that kind of commitment and investment. Yeah.
No, I like that. I like that. It kind of makes it a bit more like relatable and easier to understand when you add that
For
human
sure.
element. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Like a good example is I did a video on this queen, Rudrama Devi, and um, there's many different ways to approach it. I mean, if people are kind of curious about the process, like I could have gone in more detail about like specific like war strategies and um, things like that. Like I could have really filled up the video with things like that. But for me, it was really interesting to explore at least partly the psychology of what she might have been going through at the time. I mean, she was like a teenage girl when she was put on the throne.
Yeah.
In and like the fact that she was a woman meant that even her own cousins rebelled against her and like people she trusted backstabbed her. But she did have people on her side as well. So um I thought that was really interesting. I think that that kind of human story. And she was battling heartbreak because her father, who she was very close to, died, and her
Yeah.
husband died. And from records we have of third parties who were visiting her court in her later life, they actually talked about how much love she had for her deceased husband. So, like decades on, she never remarried as a queen. She never left
Okay.
any male heirs. So
Okay.
she could have ostensibly remarried and had a male heir. And that would have made sense for her politically, right? But
Yeah.
she actually chose not to remarry because of how much love she had for her deceased husband. So, and this is something like, it's not legend or it's not like a mythos that
Oh
was
yeah.
built up to like, this is literally,
Like history.
um, yeah, I mean, this is like Marco Polo wrote that. Like
Yeah.
Marco Polo was visiting on his way back from China. He took a ship
Oh no
and
way.
he had arrived in her kingdom and she invited him to stay in like the royal guest quarters or whatever, and he wrote about her kingdom, and one of the things he wrote about was how beloved she was, and how she actually never remarried and was very much in love with her deceased husband. So sorry, I went a little bit off track, but the point I'm trying to make is that knowing that what we know about how much love she had for her husband, to have lost her husband and her father in a single year at a time when there was rebellions happening against her reign and she was so young, you can just imagine how difficult that must have been for her, right? Like,
Yeah.
and for me, focusing the narrative in the beginning on that psychological journey was I was hoping that, okay, maybe this will capture people's interest and like you'll be invested in her as a person and you want her to win, you know?
Yeah,
Um, so that's how I tend to think of these things is there is history, more detailed history to these things, but I think it's more important as a channel that's trying to capture an audience that, okay, let me take a step back. What I'm trying to do is I don't want people to watch a video and think this is the end all be all of this
yeah,
subject. Does that make sense? Like
yeah,
I don't think it's good to watch the video and think you know everything about that particular subject. What I'm doing is I'm giving people enough information that they have a good understanding of that story and the characters and maybe some information more broadly. But I want them to, if they're interested, to keep reading and to learn more because there's
yeah,
only so much I can fit into a video, but it's enough to whet people's appetite. If that makes sense.
yeah. No, I like that. You give them basically a good like foundation to start on, and
Exactly.
obviously build on that. Yeah,
Exactly. Like, and I do try to give enough that you have something meaty to go. Like, you generally know the story and what's going on, but you know, like little details. Like, some people might be interested in. I think I've talked about this in fact, speaking of that Rudrama Devi video, I think I talked about this. Like, we know from temple grants, uh, the economics of her kingdom, and like how we even know how capital formed and was used by various enterprises. And it also tells us about inequality in her kingdom and um, like how caste was viewed in her kingdom, like how she'd broken down a lot of caste barriers and had created an economic situation that was much more favorable towards investment. And we know all that from temple grants in copper plate inscriptions. So like, um, I give you a taste of that, but like you can actually go and like read the translations
yeah,
of those copper plate inscriptions and find all these like interesting details that would give you like someone who's really obsessed with history might want to do that, you know.
that's true. That's
Um,
true.
but like if I included that in the video, that would be like a 30-minute video. Like each thing, I'm like, wait, let me like show you these translations and do that.
Yeah.
But
No, I feel you.
um,
Yeah, that's for
yeah.
sure.